Welcome back to True Crime Stories by Pam. Look at this interrogation footage. The man you're seeing right now has 2 bullets lodged in his brain. His girlfriend is dead in the next room. And the police think he did it. They've had him in custody for 6 hours. No doctor. No hospital. No help. Just questions. And with every minute that passes, his brain is dying. This is Ryan Waller. And what happened to him is so unbelievable, so infuriating that by the end of this video you'll be demanding answers. I am Pam, and this is the story of the man who survived being shot twice in the head, but couldn't survive what the police did next. Before we start, I need to warn you. This story will make you angry. Really angry. Because Ryan Waller should be alive today. His death 10 years after the shooting wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of decisions made by people who were supposed to help him. So if you're ready to hear one of the most tragic cases of police negligence in American history, keep watching, because Ryan's story needs to be told. December 25, 2006. Christmas Day in Phoenix, Arizona. While most families were unwrapping presents and cooking turkey dinner, 20-year-old Ryan Waller and his 21-year-old girlfriend, Heather Quan, were just relaxing at their small apartment. They had plans to head to Ryan's parents' house later for Christmas dinner. The tree was decorated. Lights twinkled in the window. They were young and in love and had their whole lives ahead of them. Ryan was a normal young guy. He worked hard. He loved Heather. He was close with his family. There was nothing remarkable about him except for one thing that nobody knew yet. In just a few hours, Ryan would survive something that should have been impossible. 2 gunshots to the head at point-blank range. But surviving those bullets would turn out to be the easy part. What came after would destroy him. Around 11:30 that Christmas morning, someone knocked on the apartment door. Ryan got up from the couch and walked over. He opened the door. Standing outside were 2 men he'd never seen before. Ryan immediately sensed danger. He tried to close the door. But he wasn't fast enough. One of the men raised a gun. And before Ryan could even think to duck or run or scream, the man pulled the trigger. Bang. The first bullet hit Ryan in the side of the head. Bang. The second bullet went through his nose and lodged behind his left eye, piercing into his brain. Ryan collapsed to the floor. Blood poured from his wounds. His body went into shock. By every law of nature and medicine, Ryan Waller should have died right there in that doorway. But his heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. Somehow, impossibly, Ryan was still alive. The 2 intruders stepped over Ryan's bleeding body and walked into the living room. Heather was sitting on the couch. She'd heard the gunshots. She was frozen in terror, unable to move, unable to scream. The men didn't hesitate. They raised the gun again and fired. The bullet hit Heather in the head. She died instantly, slumping forward on the couch where she'd been sitting just seconds before. The apartment fell silent except for the ringing echo of gunshots. The 2 men quickly searched the apartment, grabbing whatever they could find. Electronics. Anything of value. Then they ran out, leaving 2 bodies behind. One dead. One that should have been dead but somehow, impossibly, wasn't. Ryan lay on the floor near the door, his brain filling with blood, his body broken, but alive. Imagine what Ryan was experiencing in those next hours. He was conscious but not really aware. His brain was swelling inside his skull, pressing against bone with nowhere to go. Blood pooled in places it should never be. The bullet behind his eye was crushing nerves and tissue. Every second that passed, more of his brain was dying. But Ryan couldn't call for help. He couldn't understand what had happened. His damaged brain couldn't process the reality that he'd been shot. Hours ticked by. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3 hours. Ryan lay there in agony and confusion while Heather's body grew cold in the next room. Nobody came. Nobody heard the gunshots. Nobody called the police. Ryan's parents were at home waiting for him and Heather to arrive for Christmas dinner. They had no idea their son was lying on the floor fighting for his life. But that was about to change. At Ryan's parents' house, the Christmas dinner was getting cold. Ryan and Heather were supposed to be there hours ago. Ryan's mom called his phone. No answer. She called again. And again. Nothing. This wasn't like Ryan. He always answered. He always showed up when he said he would. Ryan's father could see the worry building in his wife's face. Something's wrong, she said. I know something's wrong. They debated what to do. Maybe Ryan and Heather had car trouble. Maybe they'd decided to spend Christmas alone. Maybe they'd fallen asleep and slept through their alarms. But none of these explanations felt right. Finally, Ryan's mother made a decision. She called the Phoenix Police Department and requested a welfare check. She gave them Ryan's address and explained the situation. The police said they'd send someone over. But hours passed. The sun set. Christmas Day turned into Christmas night. And still no word. At approximately 11 p.m. that night, almost 12 hours after the shooting, police officers finally arrived at Ryan's apartment. They knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, louder this time. And then they heard something. Movement from inside. Someone was in there. The officers pushed the door open. What they saw should have immediately told them this was a medical emergency. But that's not what happened. A young man stumbled toward them. But he didn't look like a young man anymore. The entire left side of his face was swollen to twice its normal size. His left eye was bulging grotesquely from his head, purple and black and completely shut. His face was covered in dried and fresh blood. He was confused, disoriented, barely able to walk straight. Behind him in the living room, they could see another body. A young woman. Not moving. This was clearly a crime scene. Clearly a tragedy. But the officers made a decision that would haunt Ryan for the rest of his short life. The police looked at Ryan and jumped to a conclusion. They thought he had killed Heather. Think about it from their perspective. Here's a guy with a black eye, acting confused and giving inconsistent answers. His girlfriend is dead in the next room. No signs of anyone else being there. To them, it looked obvious. This guy killed his girlfriend, probably in a fight, and now he's acting confused because he feels guilty or he's trying to come up with a story. But here's what the police didn't see. They didn't see the bullet lodged in Ryan's brain. They didn't recognize that his massively swollen face wasn't from a fist fight. It was from his brain literally expanding inside his skull. They didn't understand that his confusion wasn't guilt. It was severe brain trauma. They saw a suspect. Not a victim. They saw someone who needed to be arrested. Not someone who needed to be rushed to an emergency room. And this mistake would cost Ryan everything. Instead of calling an ambulance, the police arrested Ryan. They read him his Miranda rights. They put him in handcuffs. Ryan couldn't understand what was happening. His brain was so damaged that nothing made sense anymore. Why were these men putting metal on his wrist? Why were they pushing him into a car? What had he done wrong? He tried to speak, tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and confused. To the police, this looked like the behavior of a guilty man trying to lie his way out of trouble. They put Ryan in the back of a hot patrol car. And there he sat all day. For 4 hours. Let that sink in. 4 hours. Ryan had been shot in the head 12 hours ago. His brain was dying. Infection was setting in. The bullet was crushing vital tissue. And he sat in a hot car for 4 more hours while police processed the scene and discussed their case. No medical attention. No pain relief. Nothing. Finally, around 3 a.m., the police brought Ryan inside for interrogation. They sat him in a small concrete room with harsh fluorescent lights. Detectives came in and started asking questions. What happened to Heather? Why did you do it? Where's the gun? But Ryan couldn't answer. Not because he was lying. Because his brain literally couldn't form coherent thoughts anymore. He talked about sleeping holds. About arrows. About random things that made no sense. The detectives looked at each other. This guy is definitely guilty, they thought. He's making up ridiculous stories. They pressed harder. They accused him. They told him they knew he was lying. But they weren't watching a guilty man squirm. They were watching a man's brain shutting down in real time. They were watching someone die slowly right in front of them. And they had no idea. At one point during the interrogation, Ryan said something crucial. 3 simple words that should have changed everything. I got shot. The detectives stopped. They looked at him. You got shot? One asked. Yeah, Ryan said, struggling to get the words out. In the face. I got shot in the face. The detectives leaned forward. They examined Ryan's swollen face under the harsh lights. And then they made another terrible decision. That's not a gunshot wound, one detective said. That's just a black eye. Maybe a broken nose. You probably hurt yourself when you were fighting with Heather. Ryan tried to explain again. Tried to make them understand. But the words wouldn't come. His brain couldn't process language correctly anymore. The detectives dismissed what he said and went back to their questions. They didn't believe him. And that disbelief would prove fatal. As the interrogation continued, Ryan's condition got visibly worse. He slumped forward in his chair. He could barely hold his head up. His remaining eye kept rolling back. His speech became more slurred. Any medical professional would have recognized these as signs of severe brain trauma. But the detectives weren't medical professionals. They were cops who had already decided Ryan was guilty. So they interpreted everything through that lens. Stop acting, they told him. Stop trying to avoid our questions. Tell us what really happened. But Ryan wasn't acting. He was dying. Right there in that interrogation room, with 2 detectives staring at him, Ryan Waller's brain was literally dying. Cells were shutting down. Tissue was necrosing. The infection was spreading. And the one thing that could have saved him, immediate emergency medical care, was being denied to him. Not by criminals. By the police. After 6 hours in police custody, one of the detectives finally noticed something was seriously wrong. Ryan's face wasn't just swollen anymore. It was changing color. Getting worse. The skin around his eye looked strange. Wrong. Almost green in places. We should probably get him checked out, the detective said. Should probably. After 6 hours. After Ryan had been shot 18 hours ago. But finally they called for medical help. When the paramedics arrived and saw Ryan, they immediately knew this was a critical emergency. They didn't ask questions. They didn't interrogate him. They put him on a stretcher and rushed him to the ambulance. As they loaded him in, one paramedic asked the police a simple question. How long has he been like this? The officers looked at each other. Since we found him, one admitted. About 6 hours ago. The paramedic's face went pale. He didn't say anything else. He just closed the ambulance doors and told the driver to go fast. At the hospital, doctors immediately ordered X-rays of Ryan's head. When the images came back, the emergency room went silent. There, clear as day on the X-ray, was a bullet, lodged behind Ryan's left eye. Exactly where Ryan had tried to tell the police it was. The doctors couldn't believe what they were seeing. This man had been walking around for 18 hours with a bullet in his brain. He'd been interrogated by police for 6 hours. And nobody had noticed. The head of the emergency department called the police department immediately. He was furious. "How did you not see this?" he demanded. "How did you interrogate a shooting victim for 6 hours without getting him medical care?" The police had no good answer. "It was a mistake. We thought he was a suspect." The doctor's response was simple and devastating. "Well, your mistake might have just killed him." Doctors called in surgeons and specialists. Ryan needed emergency surgery immediately. But first they had to call Ryan's parents. The hospital called the number the police had on file. Ryan's father answered. "We have your son here," the doctor said. "He's been shot. He's going into emergency surgery. You need to come now." Ryan's parents couldn't process what they were hearing. Shot. But the police did a welfare check. Nobody told them about a shooting. When Ryan's parents arrived at the hospital, they saw their son for the first time since Christmas morning. His mother screamed. This couldn't be Ryan. The swollen, damaged, barely recognizable person couldn't be her son. But it was. A doctor took them aside and explained everything. The shooting. The bullet in his brain. The 6-hour delay. Ryan's mother collapsed. Ryan's father grabbed the doctor's arm. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked. The doctor couldn't look him in the eye. "I don't know," he said. "We're going to try." The surgery took over 6 hours. Surgeons carefully drilled into Ryan's skull to access the bullet. But what they found was worse than they'd expected. The delay in treatment had caused massive infection. The tissue around the bullet was dying, turning black with necrosis. The infection had spread throughout the left side of Ryan's face. They removed the bullet carefully. But Ryan's left eye was destroyed. The bullet had shredded the optic nerve and crushed the eyeball itself. It had to come out. But that wasn't the worst part. The infection had also reached Ryan's brain tissue. The doctors had no choice. They had to remove part of Ryan's frontal lobe to stop the infection from spreading further. They cut away dead and dying brain tissue. Tissue that controlled memory, personality, impulse control. When the surgery was finally over, the surgeons emerged exhausted. They'd saved Ryan's life. But the young man who survived would be nothing like the young man who'd opened his door on Christmas morning. Ryan was moved to the ICU, intensive care. His head was wrapped in bandages. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hummed. The doctors told his parents to prepare for the worst. Even if Ryan survived, he would have severe brain damage. Permanent disability. He'd lost an eye. Lost part of his brain. And they couldn't predict what his cognitive function would be like if he woke up. Ryan's parents sat by his bedside day and night. They held his hand. They talked to him even though he couldn't respond. They prayed. Christmas had been 3 days ago. 3 days since Ryan had been shot. 3 days since Heather had been killed. 3 days since their lives had been destroyed. And they still didn't even know who had done this or why. While Ryan lay unconscious in the hospital, the police were finally doing actual detective work. They processed the crime scene properly. They found shell casings. They found signs of forced entry that they'd somehow missed the first time. They found evidence that made it absolutely clear Ryan hadn't been the shooter. They also interviewed neighbors. One neighbor had seen 2 men running from the apartment on Christmas morning. 2 men. Not one. The police finally realized their horrible mistake. Ryan wasn't the killer. He was a victim. Just like Heather. They'd interrogated a shooting victim for 6 hours instead of getting him help. They'd caused irreversible damage through their negligence. But there was no time to dwell on that now. They had to find the real killers. And thanks to the neighbor's description, they had leads. Within days, police arrested 2 suspects. Richie Carver and his father Larry Carver. When police brought them in for questioning, they confessed to everything. They admitted they'd gone to Ryan's apartment that Christmas morning to rob him. Richie had a drug problem. He needed money. He knew Ryan from around the neighborhood and thought he might have cash or valuables. When Ryan tried to close the door on them, Richie panicked and fired. Then they'd killed Heather because she was a witness. They'd ransacked the apartment looking for anything valuable. And then they'd fled, leaving Ryan for dead. Except Ryan hadn't died. Against all odds, he'd survived. And now the Carvers were facing murder charges and attempted murder charges. All for a robbery that netted them maybe a few $100s worth of stuff. They'd destroyed multiple lives for basically nothing. 2 weeks after the shooting, Ryan finally woke up. Really woke up. He opened his remaining right eye and saw his mother sitting beside him. He said. His voice was weak and scratchy. His mother burst into tears. Yes, baby, I'm here. Ryan tried to remember what had happened. His memory was full of holes. He remembered Christmas morning. He remembered going to the door. Then nothing but darkness and confusion and pain. His parents had to tell him everything. About the shooting. About Heather. Ryan broke down when he learned Heather was dead. He couldn't believe it. Wouldn't believe it. Where is she? He kept asking. I want to see her. His parents had to explain over and over that Heather was gone. That she'd been killed. That she wasn't coming back. Each time they told him, Ryan would forget within minutes and ask again. The brain damage had destroyed his short-term memory. As Ryan recovered, doctors explained the full extent of his injuries to his family. Ryan had lost his left eye permanently. Part of his frontal lobe had been removed. This meant he would have problems with memory, focus, emotional regulation, and impulse control for the rest of his life. He would also suffer from severe chronic pain. Headaches that felt like knives in his skull. Pain that medication could only barely touch. But the worst part was the seizures. The damaged brain tissue caused electrical storms in Ryan's head. Random, unpredictable seizures that could strike at any moment. Grand mal seizures where he'd collapse and convulse. Absent seizures where he'd just stop and stare into space. The doctors prescribed anti-seizure medication, but it couldn't completely control them. Ryan would have to live in constant fear of the next seizure. He couldn't drive. Couldn't be alone for long periods. Couldn't live a normal life. Months later, Richie and Larry Carver went on trial. Ryan had to testify. He sat in the witness stand, an eye patch covering his missing eye, scars crisscrossing his head, and told his story. He described opening the door. The gunshots. Waking up confused and in agony. The defense attorneys tried to discredit him. Your memory isn't reliable, they argued. You have severe brain damage. How can we trust your testimony? But the physical evidence backed up everything Ryan said. The bullet trajectory. The forced entry. The robbery. The confessions. The jury deliberated for just a few hours. They found both men guilty of first-degree murder for killing Heather and attempted first-degree murder for shooting Ryan. Richie Carver was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Larry Carver got life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Justice was served for Heather. But it couldn't give Ryan his life back. Ryan's parents were beyond angry. Their son had survived a murder attempt, only to be nearly killed by police negligence. The 6-hour delay in medical treatment had caused permanent damage that wouldn't have occurred if Ryan had been taken to a hospital immediately. So they hired a lawyer and filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the Phoenix Police Department. They argued that the police had violated Ryan's constitutional rights by failing to recognize a medical emergency. The lawsuit detailed everything. How the police had assumed Ryan was guilty without evidence. How they'd interrogated a brain-damaged shooting victim instead of getting him medical care. How that delay had caused Ryan to lose his eye and part of his brain. How Ryan would suffer for the rest of his life because of their negligence. Surely, Ryan's parents thought, someone would be held accountable. Surely the police would have to answer for what they'd done. They were wrong. The court dismissed the lawsuit. The judge ruled that the police officers had qualified immunity. This legal doctrine protects government officials from being sued for discretionary actions performed within their official duties, as long as those actions don't violate clearly established constitutional rights. The judge said that while the officers had made mistakes, those mistakes didn't rise to the level of a constitutional violation. Ryan's parents were devastated. Their son had lost an eye, part of his brain, and any chance at a normal life. And nobody would be held responsible. The Phoenix Police Department didn't apologize. They didn't admit wrongdoing. They didn't change their policies or procedures. They didn't discipline the officers involved. They just issued a brief statement saying they were glad the real criminals had been caught and that they wished Ryan well in his recovery. That was it. No accountability. No consequences. Nothing. Ryan tried to rebuild some kind of life, but it was nearly impossible. He couldn't work because of the seizures and cognitive problems. He couldn't drive. Couldn't live independently. Couldn't do most of the things other people his age took for granted. He moved back in with his parents. They became his full-time caretakers. They helped him with daily tasks. Made sure he took his multiple medications. Watched for signs of seizures. Ryan struggled with severe depression. He'd lost his girlfriend. Lost his independence. Lost his future. Some days he told his parents he wished the bullets had just killed him. At least then the pain would be over. He had constant headaches. Constant reminders of what had been taken from him. He'd see people his age going to college, starting careers, getting married. All the things he'd never get to do. His parents never gave up on him though. They loved him fiercely and fought for him every single day. As the years passed, Ryan's seizures became more frequent and more severe. His doctors kept adjusting his medications, trying different combinations, increasing dosages. But nothing could completely control the seizures. The damaged brain tissue was like a ticking time bomb. Every seizure caused more damage. And every bit of new damage made the next seizure more likely. It was a vicious cycle with no way out. Ryan had to be careful about everything. No swimming because he might have a seizure and drown. No being alone for extended periods. No activities where a sudden loss of consciousness could be dangerous. He wore a medical alert bracelet everywhere. He carried emergency medication. His parents watched him constantly, terrified that each seizure might be the one that killed him. And they were right to be terrified. On January 20, 2016, exactly 10 years and 1 month after that terrible Christmas day, Ryan had another seizure. But this one was different. More violent than the others. More severe. His parents called 911 immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed Ryan to the hospital. But this time there was nothing the doctors could do. The seizure had been catastrophic. Too much damage to too much of his brain. Ryan Waller died that day. He was 30 years old. The official cause of death was listed as complications from traumatic brain injury. The brain injury from December 2006. The injury that should have been treated immediately but wasn't. In a very real way, the 6-hour delay in medical treatment had finally killed Ryan. It just took 10 years to do it. He'd survived 2 bullets to the head. He'd survived against impossible odds. But he couldn't survive the consequences of police negligence. When Ryan's death made the news, his story exploded across social media. True crime communities shared it. News outlets covered it. People were absolutely outraged. How could this have happened? How could police interrogate a shooting victim for 6 hours without realizing he'd been shot? The interrogation video was released to the public. Millions of people watched it. They could see Ryan deteriorating in real time. They could see him slumping forward, struggling to speak, and still being questioned. Medical experts analyzed the video and said that Ryan's condition should have been obvious to anyone with basic first aid training. The massive facial swelling, the misshapen head, the confusion and disorientation. These were all textbook signs of severe head trauma. Any paramedic would have recognized it immediately. But the police had been so convinced Ryan was guilty that they'd seen what they wanted to see, not what was actually in front of them. And that confirmation bias had killed him. Some police departments started using Ryan's case as a training example. This is what not to do, they told new officers. Always check for medical issues first before making assumptions. Always get medical clearance before interrogating someone who appears injured or disoriented. Always err on the side of caution. But many people felt this wasn't enough. Where was the accountability? Where were the consequences for the officers who'd made such catastrophic mistakes? Ryan's parents became advocates for police reform. They shared their son's story at conferences and meetings. They pushed for changes in how police handle potential victims with medical emergencies. They worked with lawmakers to try to create better protections. They couldn't save their son. But maybe, they thought, they could save someone else's son. Someone else's daughter. Maybe Ryan's death could prevent future tragedies. That became their mission. Today, Ryan Waller's case is remembered as one of the worst examples of police negligence in modern American history. 2 people died that Christmas Day in 2006. Heather Quan died instantly. She never had a chance. But Ryan survived the murder attempt. He survived 2 bullets to the head. He survived against impossible odds. What he couldn't survive was 6 hours of police custody without medical treatment. That's the real tragedy here. Ryan and Heather were just kids. 20 and 21 years old. They had their whole lives ahead of them. They should be in their late 30s now. Maybe married with kids. Maybe successful in careers they loved. But we'll never know what they could have become. Because Richie Carver wanted drug money. And because police officers made assumptions instead of getting Ryan the help he desperately needed. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a reminder that every person in custody deserves dignity. Every person deserves medical care. Every person deserves to be seen as human. Ryan Waller and Heather Quan deserved better. And we need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. If this story impacted you, kindly hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Stories by Pam. Kindly share this video and help make sure Ryan's story is heard. Kindly tell me what you think should have happened in the comment section. Should those officers have faced consequences? Should the lawsuit have been successful? Let's keep this conversation going because Ryan and Heather's story deserves to be remembered. Not just as a tragedy but as a call for change. Thank you for watching. I am Pam and I'll see you in the next one. And remember, the truth always comes out eventually. Always.